Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
How many of these?
State Representative Warren Petryk of the town of Washington in Eau Claire County is a Republican seeking re-election in the 93rd Assembly District. Warren, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Great to be back with you, Steve.
Often when I'm interviewing incumbents, I ask them this: top priority if they're re-elected in the next session, please.
Well, absolutely, it will be what the pandemic has put upon us and going into this budget. So I think it's really going to be incumbent on all of us, no pun intended, that this fiscal year will present challenges to us that are unprecedented. So protecting taxpayers and also providing the services that we need is going to be our challenge, of course. So that being said, education will be my number one priority, especially for rural schools, of which I have over in double digits, of course. And also then from education, workforce development will still be a huge priority going into this budget. We must look to the future and how are we going to put people to work? How are we going to retrain them for the new jobs that are available? But that will be a huge priority. It has been for the past 10 years, and now as chair of the committee in the Assembly, it will really be one of my high priorities going forward. So we've got to really make sure we don't lose some of the reforms that we've worked on very hard going through this pandemic. We actually looked at businesses and how they can be more successful through some great legislation that came out of AB 185 in April. So we have to encourage people to come into our state, have to make sure that those licenses that they already have are usable in our state. So that being said, agriculture is certainly in my top priorities. It always is. We really have done remarkable things for them, thanks to the work of my many colleagues that are in the industry. But things such as the Dairy Innovation Hub in UW River Falls and Platteville, Madison, finding new markets for our farmers, lowering their healthcare costs, and of course, broadband is always an issue, and we've made record investments in that. I'm very proud to say I voted for $44 million increase, and I hope that there's more. But it certainly is going to be an interesting budget.
But you're worried about protecting these services if, because of the pandemic, we don't collect in taxes what was projected, right? You're worried about that?
Well, actually, the projections are more optimistic than I thought they might be. And I believe that's due to our 10 years of really prudent budgeting, where we have maintained good services, in fact, top-notch services throughout the nation. But going forward, it is going to be a challenge. We don't know what those numbers will be. I'm looking forward to the Fiscal Bureau's new projections. So looking at the new numbers, it will be challenging, but I'm up for a challenge always.
The role that hospitals have played treating COVID-19 in Wisconsin and nationally, does that mean they should be given a greater priority in the next budget than maybe they have in the current one, sir?
Absolutely. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank the healthcare workers on those front lines. They've done a tremendous job. They prepared for the worst. And when the worst didn't come, they felt the brunt of that. And so it's great to see them bringing people back to work, bringing their doctors back, their nurses, their staffs. So that's all good. But many of them are running a deficit, which is going to be very tricky going forward. My local rural hospitals especially are affected by this. I've had great conversations with them, their administrators. So I'm going to look at, once again, increasing rural payments. As we did in the last budget. We also need to look at their workforce needs. They've told me over and over that they need people on the ground. And so I was very pleased when my CNA legislation became part of AB 185, and that was passed into law. So now we're on a level playing field with Minnesota and Iowa regarding CNAs, which are an incredibly important part of keeping our people healthy.
Senator Kapinga and Representative Bourne have a bill that says if your organization has complied with COVID protocols to protect patients, customers, or employees, you could not be sued over COVID. Are you ready to vote for that?
Not only am I ready to vote for it, I signed on as a co-sponsor.
Okay.
Just recently, September 9th.
Okay.
I was sent a letter from the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, also signed by NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, Association of School Boards. And what I find most fascinating is talking to my superintendents, to the university folks. They need this sort of tool going forward when they do everything right to protect all of the people coming onto campus or coming into their businesses, and many of them have already done that. So I was very pleased that Senator Kapinga, former representative, and Representative Knodel and Representative Bourne brought this forward. So it protects businesses, nonprofits, schools, universities, homeowners, and outdoor festivals, of which I have several in my district. So this is great legislation. I'm very much in favor of it going forward, and hopefully we'll get it done as soon as we come back.
Face masks are a very emotional issue. On September 28th, the governor's got to decide whether to extend his statewide face mask edict or let it end. What's your feeling on what should happen with the future of the face mask edict?
Certainly, everyone should stay healthy and do everything they can, follow the CDC guidelines, of which now we read is part of it, which is wearing face masks or face covering. It is, as you pointed out, quite an emotional issue. People are on both sides of this, but let's make it clear that it should be a local decision. So county boards are meeting, they're listening to their constituents throughout my district and throughout the state, and they are better prepared, I believe, than a statewide edict. But that being said, we'll watch what the future brings, but I just hope everyone is protected, not only physically, but mentally and economically. These are really important aspects of health in general. So I really want us all to flourish and stay healthy. So whatever it takes to keep us healthy, I think is a great thing.
The debate over policing reform is played out nationally and even at our front door in Kenosha.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Weingarten has 8 bills. The governor has 9 bills. The speaker's forming a task force. What, if any, specific policing reform do you think is needed?
Well, it's such a complex issue with so many moving parts, Steve, that I really believe that the speaker's task force is poised to come out with some, what I would consider to be substantial reforms that are good for the entire state. Now, that being said, I want to thank my local law enforcement folks, everyone from the small village police to the sheriff's departments of my area. All of them have done a tremendous job of being very accountable, very much communicative with the people of our district. And so I applaud them for many of the reforms that we've already done on the legislature they've put into place. I think Eau Claire is now looking at body cams in the near future. But having everybody at the table, all of the interested parties from across the state, is going to be so crucial. So that's why I'm very excited to see what comes out of this task force. And we've had great legislation come out, bipartisan, supported through our suicide prevention task force, through our youth workforce engagement task force, our water quality task force, and I co-chaired a broadband task force several years ago, and out of that came new record investments in broadband. So these are really good ways to take it forward, and it's part of that great process of democracy where the people get to say where we should go with this, and the experts get to say, in this case, what police reform should actually look like.
The debate in the Capitol over who should not draw the next congressional and legislative lines. The governor's recommended a People's Maps Commission, which would draft the lines and forward them to the legislature to enact. The Constitution says majority party in control. Who's right?
I'm a constitutionalist in almost every form, and I pretty much default to that. The Constitution is very clear. In the state of Wisconsin, the legislature draws the maps. The legislature votes on the maps. That bill is then sent to the governor. If he disagrees with what it looks like, then he can either pass it or veto it if he disagrees, of course, and then the courts will decide whether it passes constitutional muster. That all being said, I'm very much in favor of us going forward as we have. Perhaps there are ways to make it better as far as taking into consideration all the diverse areas that we do have. But as long as it passes the constitutional muster, I'm very, very good with whatever comes out of whoever draws those maps in the legislature. Now, I believe firmly good candidates with good ideas, with the support of the good people, win elections. I won under 2 different maps with the same opponent. And so I really believe that it's a matter of messaging and how you do that within your district that wins elections.
States around Wisconsin have legalized medical and recreational marijuana. That's kind of changed some of the dynamics in the Capitol. What's your position today on both medical and recreational?
Well, this has been an ongoing discussion, certainly, and other states have, to more or less success, been able to address the issue. And it is very complex because we have 2 separate issues. We have certainly the medical side, we have the recreational side. And very interestingly, last spring, we had experts in the law enforcement area, who I always default to, because they're the ones that deal with the ramifications of these laws. So they brought in experts from Colorado to discuss exactly how this is going and how it's unfolding there. To a person that was in that expert panel, they said, don't do it. We already have in Wisconsin record methamphetamine problem in Western Wisconsin, especially. We have a heroin problem. My law enforcement folks up and down the aisle, the ones in the field, the private investigators, the sheriffs, are telling me, don't do it at this point until we can look at it very, very carefully. And also on the medical side, it's a controlled substance. If the federal government changes that and allows us to go ahead and legalize it on a national basis, then we can have some research that makes sense. We can have some protocols for our doctors, and they say there's no way that they can dose something like that because there hasn't been any research on it. So it'll be an ongoing discussion, certainly.
The Wisconsin is a high property tax state, which is why local governments have been living with caps and limits on their property tax levies for more than 20 years. Do you think those caps and limits on property tax levies should continue?
I do. Now, I wasn't there 20 years ago when bipartisan legislation was passed. And at that time, I believe, if history serves me right, there were almost 8% per year increases in property tax, which is rather unsustainable for the average person, and especially in Western Wisconsin, where I have what would be called a graying demographic. And this is true nationwide. And that presents real problems in workforce development, of course, but I really want them to be able to stay in their homes. And so certainly on a local level, they are empowered already with referendum power to say, let us spend our money X, Y, and Z for these purposes. They get to sell it to the local citizens, and they get to decide whether their taxes should go up. And if that, in that way, we have some certainty. And that's exactly what businesses are looking for. It's what my citizens are looking for, and especially my elderly citizens who just want to live out their retirement here in beautiful Wisconsin.
Is it time to reduce the reliance on property tax to give local governments some additional revenue options? Representative Goyke, as you know, has a bill. If after a passage of a referendum, City of Milwaukee could levy a half-cent sales tax. Do local governments need new revenue options to reduce the property tax reliance?
Well, property tax reliance should be reformed, and many people have discussed it. We had some great ideas come through the legislature about 4 years ago that just couldn't get enough traction to get through the assembly, even, much less the Senate. But those ideas I'm always open to. I think we should have that discussion. Are there ways to relieve that property tax burden, as you put it? And it certainly is something that I'm cautious about, because where's that money going to be spent, number one, and what is the purpose of raising those taxes or levies? And I think that's what the average citizen asks when they go to to the poll booth and decide whether they would support a referendum or not.
As you know, the governor recommended raising the gas tax, now 30.9 cents a gallon, to stabilize how we pay for highways and bridges. Are you any closer to being ready to raise the gas tax?
Well, I will tell you, Steve, that I'm not in favor of raising taxes, especially in this economy. Right now, when people are struggling to pay their bills, we have so many unknowns that I would believe in my heart that it is a non-starter to raise the gas tax. That being said, there are some things we shouldn't do, and we luckily stopped. Back in 2014, we passed the amendment that will not allow a raiding of the transportation fund anymore, which happened before I got into office. And so things like that now are off the table. So that gives me great hope that we can not backfill with borrowing, for example, some of the debt. So let's be more efficient with those dollars. I really think that we need to look at how projects are bid and change and reform that way that that goes forward. So I'm just hesitant at this point. I don't think I could support a gas tax, but I'd have to see the details of it, and certainly that will come up in January, of course.
Two last questions. When a local government or a school district plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
That's a very interesting thought, because initially you would say absolutely yes, and I love to see Wisconsin businesses thrive. But if they can't provide the product that we need to provide that service in an efficient way, in a very prudent way, then I think we need to go wherever we can find the best price for the taxpayer. Because I'm a hawk. I'm watching out for the tax dollars that are going to be even more limited. So I want to see Wisconsin companies get those contracts, absolutely. But being on the border with Minnesota, I would want to look at the details of anything that's coming forward and be able to say they are not going to have retribution on Wisconsin businesses and not do businesses with us across the border. So I think we have to be very cautious with anything that comes forward. Once again, the devil will be in the details. So I would love to see more Wisconsin businesses successful. So we'll look at it very carefully going forward.
Lastly, differences between you and your opponent on November 3.
Well, thank you for asking. I'd just like to paraphrase one of the great presidents. 1984, Ronald Reagan said, not these words, but I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's liberal agenda or inexperience. That being said, I do have the experience that the people of Western Wisconsin need and deserve. I'm a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, a lifelong taxpayer, a lifelong Wisconsin business person. I'm the only one that is of the candidates. I can start on day one, focusing on what Western Wisconsin needs, what they've needed for the past 10 years, more broadband, more rural emphasis, more money for my rural schools, rural health care. All of these have been focuses of mine. So I want to collaborate with my colleagues on good legislation for Western Wisconsin. I want to advocate for my constituents in the 93rd district and Western Wisconsin and communicate. I've always been known for that. And to that end, I've always kept a focus on fiscal responsibility and the well-being of our state. I'm a proven bipartisan legislator, I should say, and I've worked across the aisle with people for many, many years now, and that work has been recognized by multiple groups, including the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Farm Bureau, the Dairy Business Association, Wisconsin Towns, Wisconsin Counties Association, veterans groups, and it's just been my humble honor to serve the people of Western Wisconsin these past 10 years. I hope that I can continue to do that and win their trust going forward, but it truly has been the honor of my life, and I look forward to serving for many more years. Thank you.
Thank you. State Representative Warren Petryk of the town of Washington is a Republican candidate for re-election in the 93rd District. Warren, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Take care. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.